We are in the middle of this series called This Change is Everything, all right? And our video has problems every week. I don't know what it is. We'll figure it out, though. Don't worry about it up there. Hey, by the way, would you guys give our sound and tech people a big hand? They have a lot of pressure on them every week. It is not fun for them when something goes wrong and it's not their fault. So don't be sure to give them a hand and tell them how much you appreciate all that they do to help us have a great worship service in here. But we're talking about this series called This Changes Everything. And I was thinking about times in your life where everything changes. And one of my favorite moments to watch is when a young couple gets ready to have their first child. You love it when because they get all giddy and they're painting rooms and they're buying all the stuff, you know what I mean? And they think that it's all going to be about all of that. And it's really going to be all about not sleeping for like 18 years and and you're worrying your pants off. I mean, that's what they don't know is coming. They just think it's going to be this wonderful thing. They've had a dog, right? Every young couple has had a dog, so they think that that's going to take care. But it is fun to watch that when everything changes. When your whole life goes from something that's orderly and you know how it's going to work to complete chaos and you have no idea how it's going to work. That's a fun thing to watch from the outside, isn't it? It's kind of harrowing to go through it. This morning, we are continuing the series talking about how Jesus literally changed everything in this world. Even if you're not a Christian, even if you would not really claim to be a Christ follower, maybe you go to church and you do all that, but you're not really totally sold on who Jesus is, I would bet you money that I could go through your life and find elements of who you are that have been affected and infected by the personage of Jesus coming into this world. Do you know that most of the world lived by an honor system until Jesus came in? So it's the way you got value, the way you got power was through having honor in your life, kind of like the Japanese have. They live by an honor culture. When Jesus came into the world, he shifted the culture from a culture of honor to a culture of love. Does this make sense to you? So when you drive by somebody who's on the side of the road, you stop and you help them. Even if you're not a Christian, you stop and do what we call the right thing or the good thing. And that is a direct result of Jesus coming into this world. He literally shifted culture by him coming into this world as a small child and as a baby. So this morning, we're going to continue to talk about some big ideas. They're kind of theological ideas of how Jesus came into the world and how he changed stuff. We're going to talk about that from a theological level. Last week, we talked about how he changed how we get into heaven, right? So up until this point, Jesus changed how. The how was the big thing that we focused on. And that up until this point, and even in our world today, people believe that what you do, and this is what they believed back then, was that people believed what you do was how you got into heaven. So if I'm good, I go to heaven. If I'm bad, I go to the other place, right? Where there's not as much ice and stuff, right? So it's not cold there. It's really hot. And so this is was the prevailing belief in the Jewish world was if I obey all of the laws and I do all things right, then I'll get to go to heaven. And Jesus came in and he flipped the script on him. And he said, it is not about rules and regulations. Do you remember this? We talked about last week. Not about rules and regulations. It is solely about a relationship with me that you enter into heaven. We talked about how some of us get troubled and get a little flustered when we see a non-Christian who is more moral than Christians. And I said, if that's a problem for you, if you struggle with that, you may still have some piece of your thinking that believes that morality, being moral, gets a person to eternity. And it does not. Jesus told the Jews, you have Moses' law, and you can't even keep it. You can't even keep it. And he changed the script. He changed how we get into heaven. And so this week, we're going to look at how he changed. Because he changed how, he changed the who as well. All right? Does that make sense? Now, I want to be clear with you. That statement kind of sounds like Jesus pulled the rug out from underneath a few people and he was like, sorry, I changed it. And you don't get it. It's not that he changed, that he literally changed it, but he pointed to the truth and showed them the truth. And there were some people who self-weeded themselves. They self-selected themselves out of eternity. Does this make sense? They chose not to choose the truth that Jesus was presenting, okay? So in a moment, we'll jump into the sermon. We're going to be going to Luke, the book of Luke, but I want to pray with us, and then we'll jump into this message for today, where we continue to kind of look at the who now, because we looked at the how last week. So if you guys will bow with me and pray. Father, I do pray this morning that we would have our hearts and minds open. I think about how many people were religious in Jesus' day, and they missed him. They did all the right stuff. They wore all the right clothes. They said the right prayers. They knew the Scripture better than any of us know it, and yet they missed you. Jesus, help us not to miss you. Help me not to miss you, God. It's people like me who missed you, and I don't want to miss you. Jesus, I pray that you would impact our world, our community here. I pray for our small town, God, and the people who live around it, who this Christmas are living without the message of Jesus in their life. And I pray that you would use us as your missionaries, that we would find them as our plus ones and bring them along with us. God, help us to be open. Help us to be willing to listen to you and to follow you. And God, help us to just find the freedom that comes in knowing Christ. I pray for anybody in here today, God, that's just hurting and feels lonely and feels broken. I pray that this message would be an encouragement to them, Jesus. It's in your name that I pray. Amen. Luke chapter 14, if you guys want to get there in your Bibles. And by the way, we'll have it up here, but it is a good exercise to look it up because it's good to know where stuff is in the Bible and to be able to find it. You could even mark this and go back and read it later if you wanted to, all right? So if you want to look that up, I'll kind of prepare you for what Luke chapter 14 talks about. Jesus has been invited over for a dinner, a party, and it is at some religious folks' house. You got to know it's going to be good whenever Jesus is invited over to the religious people's house. He's going to do something crazy. Now, Jesus goes to lots of parties, and it's funny to me because you'll find he doesn't have very much tact with the religious crowd. He tends to just punch them in the guts. But with the partier crowd, kind of the people who are the troublemakers of society, the drunks, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, we don't have like descriptions of what he does there. Maybe the disciples were worried about describing it, but we do know the people called him a drunk. They made fun of him saying he was a drunk. I don't believe that Jesus got drunk, but I do believe that he was probably a little more relaxed with that crowd. This is what it's really intriguing to me, that when he's with the religious, he punches them in the guts, and when he's with the non-religious, the irreligious, Jesus seems, from all indications, to kind of lay back and live life with them and bring them to him. All right? I think Jesus in both instances is pointing to himself. He is pointing to himself. And we'll see this in Luke chapter 14. So here's the setup, all right? Jesus is at this party. This is not, I'm just saying, this is how I like to picture it. This is not like the scriptural view of this party, but I picture them in some ugly Christmas sweaters, all right? Just because it's Christmas time, and I picture them with some wassail, a little cup of it, don't you see it? And they're all walking around, they're like, Jesus, so good to have you at my party. And, they're drinking it, and did you get some hot cocoa? Did you, and they're like walking around, everybody's, I love your ugly sweater, Jesus, and they're just walking around having this party, and Jesus, he has zero tact in these situations, and Jesus says to them, there's a guy who's walked in and he has dropsy. I'll get to what he says in a second. He has dropsy. Now this, in our modern culture, I am not in the medical profession, but we in our culture today call this edema, all right? And what edema is where your heart starts to have congestive heart failure, and because of that, your heart can't pump the blood and fluid from your extremities back through your circulatory system. Does this make sense? And what happens is a person's body will literally start to swell. Their extremities will swell up. And this person has dropsy. He is there. We don't know if he's a servant. We don't know if he's an invited guest. But Jesus is in the middle. Picture him. They don't really have ugly Christmas sweaters, but I like to picture it. They're in the ugly Christmas sweaters. They're drinking their wassail. And Jesus stops the party and he says, hey, is it okay to heal a man on the Sabbath? Whew. You picture all the clanking stops, right? People set down their silverware. Jesus has just asked a question that over and over again will get him in trouble. And normally he does it the other way. Jesus is going to heal the guy, but normally he heals the guy and then everybody gets upset and Jesus then discusses the whole problem of why they won't let him heal. We actually went through that last week, if you remember. This time, Jesus flips the script again and he asks the question on the front end. And there is complete and utter silence. Nobody says a word. And I believe it's because Jesus, again, he is so sharp as a teacher, as a leader, as an individual who is going through this world. Jesus is so sharp and on point. Jesus has just put them in a position where either way that they answer, they're in trouble. If they say, oh, it's fine to heal, then they're in trouble with all the other religious elite because they're messing with the laws and the regulations that they have about work. if you don't know, the Sabbath was the seventh day. God rested on the Sabbath. God set a precedent. God said in the law of Moses, you shouldn't work on the Sabbath. And so the religious elite had created all these regulations about what it meant to work. And they're saying if you were to heal him, you're breaking the Sabbath. So if I answer that it's okay to heal him, I'm against everybody, and I'm on Jesus' side, and that's not good. And if I come in and I say, well, no, you can't heal him, then I'm also against helping people and doing what's right and doing good. And Jesus puts them right in the middle of this predicament, and I love it, because they just are silent. And Jesus does what Jesus does best. He steps past all of the controversy. He doesn't even let it touch him, and he heals the man. He doesn't care about your rules and regulations, does he? He doesn't care about all the fake, false laws that you've set up for yourself and how you're going to live your life and how to be religious. Jesus walks past all of it, and he does what's right. Because Jesus has told us that he's guided by two principles. Love God and love your neighbor, right? You know this? You know that? Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus goes in and he heals this man, and they don't know how to deal with it. Jesus is going to now tell three stories. He gives three parables, and again, no tact whatsoever. Imagine you've thrown this big party. Everybody's having a great time. You've invited this local new celeb over to your house, right? Maybe he's going to do some cool trick or something. I don't know what's going to happen. But Jesus starts to pinpoint these people and hit them over the head, over the head, over the head. And this is what he says. He says to them first, he says, look, when you throw a party and you go to a party, don't choose the best seat. Don't choose the best seat, because if you do, you might get demoted to a lower seat. Instead, you need to choose the lower seat, and then hopefully somebody brings you up to the higher seat. And Jesus starts to punch on the guests, right? So he's punching the guests in the face, and he's saying, you yahoos, you all chose the best seat that you could. You are fighting for position. Stop fighting for position. Take the low seat, and then maybe you'll get asked up to the high seat. Then Jesus turns, I love this, he turns his attention on the guy who invited him over. And he says, could you just for a moment picture, you've been invited over to somebody's house, and you're eating with them, and you turn to them and you say, hey, next time you have a party, Kent, maybe you should stop thinking about inviting all your friends over and all the people who are going to just invite you back, and instead invite all the poor people. Invite people who could never repay you. What are you thinking, Kent, right? I would throw you out on your tail. Would you throw me out if I did that? Just think about it for a minute. Think about how abrasive Jesus is being. Now, I don't know if any of you have this person in your family. It's usually the middle child, but they're the person who wants to make everything okay. Does anybody have that? And so it gets a little tense, and that person starts making jokes. Anybody have that person in your family? It gets a little tense, and they start trying to change the subject. And, Dad, remember last year? And the dad's like, no, son, let's get. And do you have that person? I can't prove it, but that's what I think we're about to walk into in John chapter 14. Listen to this. It says, when one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God. Jesus is talking about kind of etiquette in eating and having parties. And this guy is, I think he's trying to point the attention away from what Jesus is doing. Because Jesus is pointing at him going, hey, you yo-yos, stop doing all of these things. And he says, he's sweating. I picture him sweating. And he's like, but Jesus, at least bless the person who eats at the feast of the kingdom of God. They'll be blessed, right? That'll be good. And Jesus says this. That actually comes from a passage in Isaiah. I had that. We're going to skip it this morning. You can read it if you want to. It comes from Isaiah 25, 6 through 8. Talks about the feast of the kingdom of God. It's a really great passage. Talks about God wiping the tears away from their face. This is what this guy is referencing. This powerful passage about how we will someday all be in this feast with God. He'll prepare this great banquet. And this is what Jesus does. This guy references this passage, says when we're all there, we'll all be blessed, right? And Jesus tells a third story. Here it comes. It says this, verse 16 of Luke 14. A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servants to tell those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. Now, the passage in the Greek where it talks about him throwing a great banquet, it actually calls it a megos. Megos banquet, all right? So the idea here is this sucker is huge. I mean, it is like steak and caviar. He has gone all out. Have you ever heard of the Japanese steak where they massage the cow? You know what I'm talking about? And they like massage it. They keep the cow in the dark all the time. He has gone out and bought that kind of quality meat, right? This is the good stuff. He has put it all out. Some of you are like, all you can think about is steak now, right? Oh, ribeyes. Now, he has put out the good stuff. It is ready for a big feast. He sends out his servants to go tell them, it's time to come. Everything's ready. This was actually something that the upper class would do. They would wait till the party was ready, then they would send out servants to tell everybody, it's cooked, it's hot, it's ready, everybody come. And listen to what happens. Some of you know this story. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me. I just made an investment, a pretty large investment. I need to go check on it. If you just give me, I got to go check on it. Okay? Excuse me. Another said, I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Still another said, I just got married, so I can't come. The servant came back and reported this to his master. You Megos, remember? You have put together the spread of the century. And nobody shows. When Jenny and I got married, we registered for presents. Oh man, that is like the most fun thing I've ever done in my life. Because they give you a scanner, and you go to Target, and you're like, beep, I want one of those, beep, 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 15 of those, right? And I am registering for everything. Jenny's like, oh, we need some pots and pans. And I'm like, we need a power washer, beep, and we need candy bars, beep, beep, beep. And I just went crazy on it, you know? And so every day I would get on and check what things had been what had been bought on our registry. Because you could look online and see as they had been bought. And there was a day when I get on and I check, and pots and pans have been bought, dishes, silverware, and then I see it. Power washer. Bought. Oh, baby. I was like, dude, they bought me the power washer. And it was not just one of those, like, plug it in the wall. It was like you could take the side of your house off with this thing. You know what I'm talking about? This was a power washer. And I'm elated. It gets to our wedding day. I almost forget to say I do, because all I can think about is the power washer. You know what I'm saying? I'm just picturing this. I'm looking at the presents over there, just where's the power washer? We get done. The wedding's all over. We come back. We start opening presents. And I'm like, yeah, pots and pans, great. Woohoo, yes, this is great. Woo, thanks. Oh, a blender, woohoo. And I'm throwing stuff around. And we get to the last present, and it's this big. And I'm thinking, it can't be a power washer. You know what happened? Some yo-yo went out and bought the power washer and kept it for themselves. Get out of town. Oh, kid broke my little heart. This guy has thrown the banquet of the century. He's invited everybody to it. And they all opt out of coming. You've had that happen to you before, right? You've thrown just a normal party and people don't come. You can understand why he's angry, can't you? He has gone all out. If Jesus is really, truly speaking of the feast of the Lord, this is powerful, this concept, this idea. Listen to what he says to do. The servant came back and reported this to the master. The owner of the house became angry. No power washer, right? He became angry and he ordered his servants, go out quickly into the streets and the alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. You hear what he just said? Now, you have to know that in a religious context, this is messed up. What Jesus just said is messed up in this Jewish culture. Because the crippled, the blind, the lame, the poor, all of those people would have been considered to be outside of God's will. In this culture that Jesus is speaking into, they believe if you're sick, if you're lame, if you're infirmed, if you're poor, it is a curse from God because you've done something wrong. There is a point in time where Jesus heals a guy, and his disciples say, who sinned? This man or his parents? Do you remember that story? They are pointing directly to this concept. And when Jesus says this, I want you to get how countercultural this is. All of the rich people get uninvited. He doesn't go and beg them, oh, please come, I prepared. I got one of those cows where they massage it and they keep it in the dark. It's ready. Ribeyes, folks. Ribeyes and fillets. He doesn't go and beg them. He gets angry. And he removes the invitation. And he gives it to who, in this culture, people who are religious outsiders. He invites them, bring the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame. Sir, the servant said, what you ordered has been done. They went out, they did it, but there's still room. This guy has mansion, like huge castle kind of place. There's still room. Then the master told his servant, go out to the roads and the country lanes. Go to the rural parts, right? Go to Oswego, right? That's it. Lucky us, we're in the last part of this parable. Go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come so that my house will be full. I tell you, listen to verse 24. This, if I'm sitting in that room that day and I'm picking up on what the parable is really about, if I'm sharp enough, which likely they were not, but if I'm sharp enough to pick up on it, he says, I tell you, none of those who are invited will get a taste of my banquet. That is harrowing. And you know why? Because they thought, remember the how? They thought they were the very only people who were going to get to taste of it. They thought because they had been so good and they had done so many good things and they were missing the entire point. They thought that they were paying it was too hard to pay attention to the invitation. Get it? They were just too busy. There was too much going on in their life for them to slow down and give themselves to the invitation of the master. And instead, they're looking at it and it's just too inconvenient. I've got stuff. I just bought a field. I got to go check on it. I've got some oxen over here that I bought. I just got married. I can't slow down. I can't stop. I can't give myself for this. And Jesus says that because these people are so caught up in what they're doing, they're going to miss the invitation. And it's going to be too inconvenient for them, and they will miss out. I tell you that not one of those who are invited will get a taste of my banquet. This morning, let me tell you a story real quick. Do you guys know who Winston Churchill is? Everybody raise your hand and say yes. All right. World War II, remember Britain, kind of saved the day kind of guy. Smoked cigars, cool hat, right? I should get a hat like that, shouldn't I? Winston Churchill, before he was the Winston Churchill that you all know, this is really interesting to me. I had heard this story a long time ago, and I thought, perfect story. I started researching to make sure I had the details right. 116 years ago, last night, all right, this story took place. So how cool is that? So 116 years ago, last night, Winston Churchill is 25 years old, and he is in a prisoner of war camp. He was a wartime correspondent, and he had been on this train. The British were fighting with one of their colonies, trying to bring it under control, and they're fighting, and he was on this train, and the train had kind of crashed, if you will, and there was a fight that ensued, and he got captured along with a few other guys and got put in a prisoner of war camp. They decided to treat him as though he was part of the military. And Winston Churchill is in this prisoner of war camp. Maybe I'll tell that part of the story sometime. But he escapes from the prisoner of war camp. It's a cool story how he does it. And Churchill is right outside the prison, and he's got to make some quick split-second decisions. He knows he has to get to the other side of town, but he's afraid if he goes around the town, he'll get caught because it'll become daylight, and he'll get caught before he can get around the town. And Churchill makes the most daring decision I think you could make in this circumstance. He decides to walk straight through the middle of town. See, he figures that nobody would expect an escaped prisoner of war to just walk through town with his head held high and acting like nothing's going wrong, right? He figures everybody will think it's crazy, and they'll think, well, that can't be him because nobody would ever do that, right? So Churchill does it. And he walks through town that night. This is crazy to me. He walks through town that night, just doesn't walk fast, just kind of nonchalantly walks through. Hey, how you doing? How you guys doing? Good to see you. And he walks right out of town, right underneath everybody's noses. The very person they were looking for, was right in front of him. And they all missed him. You see, folks, these guys, this religious group, they're having this fantastic meal together. And Jesus is pushing all of their buttons, I believe, because he wants them to get to the point where they'll have a relationship with him. He is trying to get them to get past everything that they've viewed as part of how you become religious in this life. And he pushes their button and he tells this story. And what they don't get is that the master is sitting right in front of them. He is right underneath their noses the entire time. And his invitation is waiting for them. Could I just get a little bit devotional with you guys this morning? I wonder if for some of us, Jesus' invitation is not right underneath our noses. If he has not been inviting and calling to you, and you've just been missing it because of the busyness of life. I was telling my daughter Piper the other day, or actually it was Parker. I'd heard Piper reading this in her Bible. But her Bible talks about this, Piper's Bible talks about when you bring in, Jesus brought the little children in and they sit on his lap. And the way her Bible said it was, Jesus said, blessed are the children because they get God better than adults do. I loved it. So I was talking to little Parker last night. She'd had kind of one of those nights. I said, Parker, don't you know that you kids get Jesus better than we do? You see him, you are able to have a faith in him so much clearer than I can. And I believe it's because for a kid, the invitation is just all that it is. It is an invitation to party with the Savior, to come and have some fine dining with him, to enjoy life. Do you know how Matthew says this? This is one of my favorite passages. Matthew 11:28 through 30. Some of you know this by heart. This is a way that I love to hear the invitation in these words of Jesus. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. Doesn't that sound good? Tell me you don't get wearied and burdened sometimes. Tell me life does. I mean, sometimes life is great, right? It's grand. Sometimes it's just too much to handle. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you more stuff to do. Right? No. I'll give you rest. Oh, rest sounds so good. Take my yoke upon you. Do you know a yoke is a big wooden implement? I know some of you are Bible scholars, you don't even need this, but it's a big wooden implement that would go across two necks of a pair of oxen. And there's some joke about a pair of oxen. I don't know what it is, though, so I'm not telling it. And it's horrible to even say out loud. And they would put this wooden implement across their, I think it's a paradox, I don't know. They put the wooden implement across their necks, and they would work together, and they would plow a field together, and they would work in unison. And the idea here, the rabbis, the ancient rabbis, would call their teaching a yoke. And Jesus is saying, take my yoke, take my teaching upon you, because it's light and it's easy. Do you hear the words that he's saying? Do you hear the invitation of the Master into your life? Come to me, come to me. I will give you rest. Come to me. My teaching, it's light, it's easy. You just hook up with me and I pull the load. Does that sound like your life? Does it sound like your life? Or are you trying to pull all the load? Are you trying to pull everything through? Are you trying to do it all? Are you trying to keep everything together? Because I will tell you this, I believe that our job in life, folks, is to pay attention to his invitation. I think what we're supposed to do is pay attention to his invitation. Because for some of you, the invitation is brand new. It is a first call to you, and he's saying, come to me. If you are in the middle of life and it's chaotic and it's crazy and you don't know how to take care of it, come to me, and I will give you rest. But some of you have been through life and you've accepted Christ, and you've already made that decision. You've been baptized into Jesus, and he is calling to you still. And he is still saying to you, come to me. Let me be your rest. Let me be your hope. Let me be your life. I don't personally want to miss it. Do you? Our job is to pay attention to his invitation. I envy some of you. I'm going to close with this, so if the worship team wants to come up, we'll wrap up in a second. I envy some of you who got to parent in a time when life was slower and you didn't have... How many of you parented and these were not even a thing yet? Anybody? Were you a parent? Yeah. And it was like, if I'd have shown you one of these back then, I'd have been a space alien or something, or I'd have been off of Star Trek. Beam me up, Scotty. That's as close as you got back then to even dreaming of one of these, right? That's it. And I envy some of you because for you, I know life was still busy. I know it was hard, but I think the pace of life, agree with me or not, I think the pace of life has continued to escalate because we created all of these things to help us get stuff done. And I think the idea was we can get stuff done faster and we can get stuff done easier and you'll have more time in life. But instead of having more time, all of your time is spent with this thing. There are some people who literally spend more time with one of these than with real people. Have you met them? Yeah? They're called teenagers, right? Oh, I'm totally joking, teens. They're like, hey, no, actually our teens are amazing. They're awesome. Yeah. Give it up for the teens. That's good. Good cover. Thanks. I envy you. Because you see, in my life, there is this, now I'm not saying, I know some of you weren't perfect parents and you still had things that you went down a different river than you could have. But it is tough as a parent today to sometimes give your kids the attention that they deserve and need, because just everything is chaotic in life. Everything. I mean, there's something in your pocket screaming for your attention, right? Not just on a TV, not in a box in your room. It's literally in your pocket, and it's in your hand all the time. And I don't know if other young parents like me, but you'll find yourself looking at your child over a screen, right? There's a screen in between you and your child. And every time that happens for me, I go, oh, what am I doing, right? It is difficult to put away and pay attention to the subtle invitation of my children of, Dad, play with me. Dad, go outside and let's play catch. Dad, will you jump on the trampoline? It is difficult sometimes for me to pay attention to that subtle invitation, but I'm telling you, if I miss it, I will not get another chance with him. Amen to that? Folks, I'm just telling you what is so harrowing about this story in Luke chapter 14, because Jesus did change the world. He changed how we and who will get into heaven. He changed it. And he said, it is going to be those who respond to my invitation. It is going to be those who come to me, to Jesus. This morning, I wonder if some of you, it would not be a good thing to put down the stuff that you're having to look over to see Jesus. What I mean is, some of you are so busy in your lives. You have so much going on that there is no room to just be with him. I was reading this morning in my devotional time, Jesus said that my word will sanctify you. That means that if you put the word of Jesus and of God in your heart, it will start to produce in you a fruit of righteousness. Remember how I said last week, this is not freedom from rules and freedom from righteousness, it's freedom from rules and regulations. That means that our righteousness doesn't come from all this good stuff I can do. It comes from Jesus. There is a place where putting God's word in your heart will bring you into a place of knowing him better and deeper, and it will change who you are. You won't have to change it. It won't be this hard thing. It'll just be God changing you from the inside out. Some of you don't have time to pray because you are so busy going to work and coming home and going to sleep and arguing and fighting, having to do the laundry and having to write the checks and all the bills and the kids, and they're in college. We've got to go see them. And you are just like this, a million, and you can't see Jesus over the screen that's in front of you. Folks, if I could call you to something, I know this is an emotional plea kind of, I would call you to come to him. I would call you to respond to him. Because just the reason I put down my phone, and I'm not perfect at it, but the reason I put down my phone is because this thing doesn't matter a heap of hill beans compared to my kids, right? This is nothing compared to my kids. The stuff that you are so worried about, you're so entangled with, don't you think your 5-year-old self would beat you up for missing God for that stuff? Right? They'd be like, what are you doing? This God, he's calling to you. Have faith like a child. This morning, could I call you to just come to him? This morning, we're going to sing a song in a moment. And it is a song for you to respond to. And I just want to invite you, maybe some of you, your personalities gear you towards coming up and sharing or having people pray over you. Some of you don't have that at all. Maybe some of you even have the personality where you know somebody in this room who needs prayer, and you need to go over and put your hands on them. I know this morning Bill and Renee Cochran need prayer. They're not even here, but maybe some of you could gather just together where you're at and pray for them. I don't know, right? What if we just were that family, that church, just loved, and we weren't so worried about what other people thought? But I want to invite you this morning, however you need to respond, get down on your knees in your chair, sit down if you need to, open the Bible up, let his word start to permeate you, walk out of the room if you need to. I don't care. You don't need me to tell you. You need to spend time with God. He's the one you need to come to. I want to invite you today, as we sing this song, to make a step towards coming to him. And it may just simply be evaluating the things in your life that you need to just take out and make some room so that you can have Jesus influence and change you. One of the scariest things to me about this story, and I'll close with this, is that he doesn't go and force himself upon the people he's invited. It is their choice. And once they make the choice and say, please excuse me from coming, he moves on. That should scare the daylight out of you. I don't know at what point God moves on. I don't know at what point you make the final call of, please excuse me, I'm done. But I do know that he's a gentleman and he will not force himself upon you. He wants you to make the choice. And I think there's probably a place where our hearts get so hard that we walk away from eternity forever. And we walk away for the stuff of this world. This morning, if you need to make a decision for Jesus, come up and talk to me. If you need to just come back to him, you can come up to talk to me. You can pray, do whatever you need to. This is your time. Would you guys stand and worship with me this morning?